Hey, welcome all you Outshiners to the 22nd Annual Outshine Film Festival, running August 20th through the 30th, all virtual, so from the comforts of your own home. We're here for the Q&A for Cured. We're excited to have some talent with us who I'll introduce later. But first, a big thank you to our community partner. Our community partner for this particular film is AIDS Healthcare Foundation. Do great work. They've supported us for many years, and they support all of you in the community. Here is a few words about what AIDS Healthcare Foundation does. All right, thank you again to AIDS Healthcare Foundation and all of our community partners who support what we do. We appreciate it, so thanks again. As I mentioned, we're here for the Q&A for Cured. We're very excited to have four wonderful people with us to talk a little bit about the film. First of all, we have Reverend Magora Kennedy. She's been fighting for social justice for more than 5 decades, an active participant in the civil rights movement, the women's movement, and the movement for LGBTQ equality. She's a former Black Panther who describes herself as the gayest great-grandmother you'll ever meet. She resides in New York City, and welcome to Reverend. And the Reverend is looking for the unmute button. The wonders of wonderful technology. While we're waiting for her, we'll move on to our next guest, Dr. Charles Silverstein. He's a licensed psychologist in private practice in New York City, best known for his 1973 presentation before the Nomenclature Committee of the American Psychiatric Association that was instrumental in the removal of homosexuality from the organization's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, also known as the DMS, which we'll refer to later. He's also the author of 8 books, including The Joy of Gay Sex, which he co-authored with Edmund White. Dr. Charles, thank you very much for being with us. And Charles is looking for something.
Excuse me, I got a phone call. I have to turn.
Oh, that's all right. Just wave and we'll be back to you in a little bit. Moving on, Patrick Sammon, a Washington, D.C. based filmmaker, is the creator and executive producer of Codebreaker, an award-winning drama documentary about the gay British codebreaker, Alan Turing, that reached more than 3 million viewers worldwide. Thanks for being here, Patrick.
Good to be here.
We'll be back to you. And last but not least, of course, is Bennett Singer, an LA-based filmmaker. He's been making social issue documentaries for more than 20 years. He co-directed Brother Outsider, a documentary portrait of the gay civil rights activist Bayard Rustin, that premiered at Sundance and won more than 20 international prizes, including the Audience Awards at Outfest, Frameline, and Newfest. Bennett, welcome.
Great to be here.
Thank you all for being here. We're excited to talk a little bit about Cured, an amazing film. I loved it. I love all the films, but I definitely have some of my favorites. So, Patrick, let's start with you. What was the catalyst to the film, and why tell the story? Is it something you saw somewhere and went, "Wow, that would make a great story"? What was it that led you to Cured?
Yeah, I had been aware of the story, reading about LGBTQ history, but really what sparked the decision to try and make this film was about 6 years ago. A friend of mine, Charles Francis, wrote a treatment about the life of Frank Kameny, and I read the film treatment, and it was a good treatment, but the scene that jumped out at me was he wrote about the scene with Dr. Anonymous and the mask, and I was looking to start another film project, so it jumped out at me as a great idea for a documentary. So then I had met Bennett previously a few years before that, so I recruited him to join the effort with me, and we quickly realized how significant this moment was in LGBTQ history, and there had not been a documentary made about it. And so we started reaching out, digging into the story, and we started connecting with the people who were in the middle of this fight, like 2 of the great heroes here with us today. And we decided at that point to try and make this film. And it was a 5-year odyssey, so it's really exciting to start sharing it with audiences, and we appreciate the opportunity to present it at Outshine.
Well, thank you. And now flipping over to Bennett, and sort of staying with the same production, You sort of said it took 5 years, but what was the process? I mean, I would assume there was a lot of archival material to sort of run through. And then sort of to piggyback on that, were there anything you sort of, I'm sure had this context of what was going to happen, but were there any surprises or sort of, veering off of the main path that sort of presented themselves?
Absolutely. And I echo Patrick's thanks to you and the festival for hosting the film. It was absolutely an archival treasure hunt. And when we began, we weren't really sure how much material we would find, including, or especially of the key moments. There are these two APA annual meetings in 1972 and 1973 that were really pivotal. And when we went into the research process, as far as we knew, there was no footage and there was also no audio. And so I think two of the most sort of electrifying discoveries came when we found audio of those meetings, in particular the John Fryer speech, which we turned up. Patrick and I spent several days together at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, digging through his 217 boxes that are quite a voluminous lifetime of materials, and one was labeled miscellaneous audio. And you can't stop us. We were so intrepid and so ingenious that we opened that box, and there, after listening to a bunch of really miscellaneous stuff, we discovered the speech from 1972 at the convention, where Dr. Fryer is wearing his mask and stunned, the assembled psychiatrists by saying, "I am a homosexual, I am a psychiatrist," at the risk of his career and his medical license. So that was certainly a huge discovery. And similarly, we found that amazing David Susskind show from 1971, which was the very first time that open lesbians had appeared on national television ever in America. And it was because of that we worked backwards. And after seeing Reverend Kennedy, we started researching and trying to find out, is she accessible? Can we find her? Is she still alive and well? And it was another miraculous moment when we did connect with her through a Stonewall Veterans website organization. And we're able, with her and with Charles Silverstein and with so many of the participants, to juxtapose their younger selves 50 years ago with their present day reflections on those their younger selves and on the movement that they helped shape. So that really is at the heart of the film. And there's so many examples where we had moments from the past juxtaposed with present day reflections on what those moments meant.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see what you see on camera and then think about the mounds of things that we never do get to see. So maybe it's cured too. But you mentioned Reverend Kennedy and Dr. Silverstein, and we're so excited and honored to have you both with us. And thank you not only for being with us today, but for all you do for us in the gay and lesbian community. So, we appreciate that. Give me your general reactions to having sort of a life that you lived portrayed on screen, and sort of another viewing of, was there any surprises or anything that you looked at differently seeing it in the film that you may not have thought about as you sort of lived that life? If we can go to you, Reverend Kennedy, first.
Oh, wow. Gosh, there's so many things, but you really don't have the time. I think the most interesting thing was to see myself on the David Susskind show, because that was hilarious. I mean, he was like almost like absolutely impossible. And I had said to Barbara Giddings, I said, watch this, we're going to get him, but good, And so, I looking back over it now, because like I'm 81 years old. So, I mean, it's like thinking about one of the interesting things was like when we came on, like going into the studio and we're all taking our seats, this man was so uncomfortable. I thought to myself, my God, is he peeing his pants or what? He was just, it was just unbelievable. That was one thing. Then the other thing was so many things that I had talked about over the years, to see some of the people and some of the footage of, the Stonewall uprising. Because over my years, I've been fighting with people. No, this was not a riot. Let me tell you what a riot is. This was an uprising against the police, and to see so many people that, that I recognized who was out there that weekend. And also the other gentleman that was on was talking about what was happening on the West Coast. Well, one of the things that I did reference was that while we were back here on the East Coast in 1969 and we were, uprising against the police, out in California, they was like doing this whole thing like with the Psychiatric Association. And also during that time, Reverend Troy D. Perry started Metropolitan Community Church. So there was like, to me, it was like a whole spirit of uprising that was going out throughout the country and gave people, like, for lack of a better word, getting our wings and getting strong enough to say, hey, yeah, the life is not going to be the same. We're going to make a change. We're going to make a difference. But who knew?
Exactly. And Dr. Silverstein, do you recall sort of, again, seeing yourself on screen and living the portrait? Did anything sort of surprise you, or was anything a little different or, illuminating that when you actually saw it come on the screen?
No, I don't think I was illuminated. One of my reactions is that when you make a film, you can't tell everything. You only tell the highlights. And there were a lot of other people who were involved and a lot of pain that went along with that period. And part of that pain had to do with what happens in the social movement when people are fighting for their rights. And one of the things that inevitably happens in all social movements is that there's internal conflict that goes on. And there was a lot of internal conflict that went on during those years. Nothing that appeared in the film, and you wouldn't be able to, because there were too many dimensions to it. But a lot of it had to do with what the goals were and the means toward them. And those of us who appeared in the films are those who won out or are still alive, because a lot of the people from that period of time are now dead, some of ordinary diseases, unfortunately, a lot of them from AIDS. And I remember those people who died of AIDS and what they went through. It was a particularly horrible disease. But I also want to say one other thing, and that is I'm so glad that this documentary is coming out, because young people today don't know what we went through and what it was like to be a faggot, a dyke, a queer in those days, and the kind of discrimination that existed against us, how we were not only declared sick by the medical profession, but rejected by every religious group, and in many cases thrown out of homes.
Yes. As young as 9 and 10. Yes.
Well, I take your word for it. I don't know 9 or 10, but I know 16.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, thank you again for illuminating us on those. I think especially some of the young
9 might be a little, but I know between 10 and 12. I met some, that were living in the pier, living at the piers down at the end of Christopher Street.
Yes.
Which started the whole thing about having a homeless place for youth, because kids were getting kicked out. 9 is a little, but I know the double numbers, between 10 and 12. It was horrendous and horrible. And the older ones, like you, the 16-year-olds would take care of the younger ones.
Well, they were do that, or since they had to live, a lot of them hustled.
Yes.
They raised money that way.
Mm-hmm.
And the city of New York didn't give a shit about them.
Tell it.
Some things have changed, some things have not. let's move to big TV moments, because you both have probably had many, but in the film there are two sort of big highlights, and Reverend, you alluded to it earlier, your interview with David Susskind on national TV. What are you feeling going into this? And like, you had a lot at stake, I think, of what you were trying to do and get across. And do you felt like that happened, and do you think it was worth it in the end of what you really put yourself out there?
Yes.
All right. And was that something you were nervous to do, or was it?
No.
I can't imagine. Okay.
Well, I think that was very important. David Susskind did actually two programs, one with lesbians and one with gay men. And in both cases, he acted like the dumb heterosexual who thinks that everything gay and lesbian is sick. But actually, the purpose was to get out information and to show living gay people who thought well of each other. And it was actually an important advance in gay and lesbian issues to have those programs.
Mhm.
So he was playing dumb for a reason. He wasn't so dumb.
Yeah. And Charles, your moment came, again, one of your moments came on 60 Minutes.
Right,
And that, if I remember right, that was the same day you had just come out to your mother.
exactly.
You have sort of all this going on to your mind. What was your sort of frame of mind as you prepared to, again, meet a national audience and try and convince them that, that homosexuality was not an illness?
Well, the thing with my mother complicated things because she arrived a day early. The day that 60 Minutes was supposed to appear over my office. And while I was coming out to her, 60 Minutes arrived an hour early. And they just schlepped in with all their cameras and cables and things like that, right in the middle of my coming out to her. And she was pretty pissed off at the whole thing. I might add that Barbara Giddings was there, and she was also interviewed. And Barbara knew the situation that was going on with me and my mother. And being Barbara, she wanted to smooth things over. She was very good at that. And she walked over to my mother and said, "Oh, Mrs. Silverstein, I can see the resemblance," thinking that she was talking to a sane woman, but she wasn't. And she had no way to know that my mother had remarried and her last name was not Silverstein. And my mother looked at her and said, "Are you a lesbian too?" And she said, Barbara said, "Yes." And my mother said, "Well, you're sick too," and walked out of the room. And it went on from there. That was only, the 60 Minutes was two different sessions. One is the office, and then one back at their own studios. And it was a very important program because it was so important, and so many people in America watched it.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by, and this is to Bennett and Patrick, maybe both, or one you can speak to. You let the story be told by those who lived the story. It's a historical documentary that really Reverend and Doctor, but the other people involved as well. Can you talk a little bit about sort of that effort or that consciousness to make it like their story?
Sure, I could jump in on that. The very first project I worked on years ago now, but it was sort of life-changing and taught me so much about making historical documentaries, was Eyes on the Prize, which is the 14-hour history of the civil rights movement. And the style of that project was the only people on screen would be first-person eyewitnesses. There was a whole board of historians that worked with us in terms of research and figuring out whom to interview and how to shape the narrative, but the historians didn't appear in the narrative or in the and there's lots of historians who could offer commentary, but we made the same decision that could be, we would only allow people to talk who were witnesses to the events. And in this story, there's a special reason to which you hear a couple times in the film, and you see those placards. And so, honestly, we did go back and forth, and we actually shot some interviews with historians, and our editor, Steve Hefner, who's fantastic and deserves so much credit for shaping the film, as does our entire team, I should say. But Steve really took us aside and was we had a reckoning about, what is the sort of most authentic way to tell the story. And even though we love the voices of the historian, an immediate way to tell the story would be without historians offering commentary, and similarly without a third person narrator. It just injects a different tone and a different sense of presence. And so, especially given the amazing memories of the people that we did have access to, and the vivid and electrifying testimony, I hope that decision translates to viewers and does make it feel fresh and immediate.
Yeah, and it does. And Patrick, we talked a little bit about that stuff that didn't get in. Is there a lot of that stuff that you're just like I said, cured too? Is there so much more out there that could make another? It's just so, I imagine it's so frustrating as a documentarian.
Well, it's sort of when you choose to be a filmmaker, you understand if we wanted to tell every detail, we would have written a book. And I appreciate Dr. Silverstein for understanding we can't put every detail into it, because you miss some nuances of, a fight here or a strategic decision here. And so, there was ahead of the referendum that happened in the spring or winter and spring of '74 was, the gay members. That was a detail we wanted to include, but we just, you have to sort of narrow down the story to keep people, following it. One of the other big challenges with the story is, and I know Dr. Silverstein or Reverend Kennedy can speak to this, but there wasn't one hero or hero here. It was a group of people coming in and playing different parts, some insiders, some outsiders, some protesters, some people playing both roles. And so that made it, from a filmmaking perspective, really hard because it's convenient when a story like my last film about Alan Turing, it was convenient, right? There's one main character and you tell his story. So that was one of the big challenges, is how to bring those different people together who play different parts and make it all connected and have the audience connect with the great people. So hopefully we've succeeded at that, but that was certainly one of the big challenges.
I would also just add, in terms of storytelling and stuff that didn't make it into the film, one really exciting recent development is that the documentary has recently been optioned as a basis for a scripted feature series that's being created by Stephen Canals, who is the co-creator of Pose. And so he's envisioning like a 6-hour scripted series that Patrick and I will be collaborating on as producers. And just the notion of writing scenes with actors about some of these moments, like what was John Fryer doing and thinking as he was putting on that mask, or what was happening behind the scenes of into fantastic
Bennett,
scenes. And
can we choose who plays us?
I think that's going to be the next important decision. How,
Old.
I was assuming Brad Pitt, but you know, maybe he's getting a little old.
And who gets to play the Q&A person? No, anyway.
Well, you know,
Well, good luck. That's
but
great.
it's just exciting, you know, to have another, as with the Harvey Milk film, you know, I love that documentary, and in fact that the Times of Harvey Milk for me was one of the central reasons I wanted to go into the world of creating documentaries. But I do think the feature version reached a whole new audience, and so have that potential.
Yeah, congratulations. Reverend, I have a question for you. We're living in fraught times. There's racial inequities, social inequities, not only gay and lesbian, Black Lives Matter. It's a really important time. And as someone who is heard the things going on now, and like how we learn about change and the change agents can happen. Do you see any, you know, how do you react to those two?
Well, one thing I always say, you know, it's like I had taken a class with Dr. Leonard Jeffries at City College. And one of the things that was interesting is that racism in this country is systemic. So it ran its gamut, you know, not only in the civil rights movement, but in the gay community. And then even more so because like where I come from, I'm originally from Saratoga Springs, New York, and upstate New York. You know, gay men and gay women, they had to hang together. Like we all had to stay together, you know, to stay. And it wasn't until I started moving downstate and to see this big separation between gay men and gay women, that was sort of, you know, an eye opener for me. But as far as we go now, I'm at the point where I say that this pandemic was both, you know, it's a curse, but it's also a blessing. Number one, a lot of people thought they had a chance to actually see a cop murder a Black person, which is something that had been going on in the Black community. Also, with what I was talking about that was happening in the village, in '69, was the cops would raid the bars wherever they felt like, beat the daylights out of gay people, you know, herd them off into the wagons, take their jewelry and things like that. You know, so like we, you know, as gay people and Black people, we still at the brunt of police brutality.
Yeah, thank you for those words. Dr. Silverstein, I think we're getting ready to talk to the nomenclature people, and there was a part, I think it was science versus politics. We're sort of dealing with that now. Do you think
It's what?
Science versus politics? And I think you had a little bit of both. Do you think that those comments you were making to the nomenclature culture, I'm sorry,
Nomenclature committee.
yes, so you were about to talk to them and try and convince them again, you know, your side of the story, and part of it was science or the lack thereof, and part of it was politics. Did you see it as more science, more politics, or kind of a combination of both?
It's all politics. It's all politics. What I present it's about economics. And I mean, after all, the science had always been there. It was nothing problem rather than fight us anymore. But it's all about economics and politics. You have to remember, when gay people went to a psychoanalyst to be cured of his homosexuality, the psychoanalyst didn't do it free. He charged. And there were a lot of gay people them because they were sick. And a large part of what we wanted to do was hurt the psychoanalysts in their pocketbook. And that's what we did. We wanted to take ending up feeling more ashamed of themselves and it costing them a lot of money to boot. So science really
certainly better off than we were, but there are still, there's still a little ways to go. This for all of you, do you see differences between the past, which might have been electroshock or more, what we think of as harsh, or today? In the present cures, if we will. Reverend, to you, you want to start that?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Sure. Against licensed professionals trying to change the sexual orientation of anyone under 18. But if they're not licensed professionals, they can still attempt to change people's sexual orientation, generally kids. And that's perfectly legal, and they're usually religious groups that promise to change kids, make them normal. And it's usually done by praying to Jesus. And the result they are an incredible group of hypocrites and should be called out for that.
Yeah.
And another thing on that, as far as like the psychoanalysts and psychiatrists and whatnot, first of all, a lot of those so-called people wouldn't even think about taking Black clients. The other side of that, most of us in the Black community couldn't afford it. Church of God in Christ. I mean, they were like eminent. It was like, half of the choirs and the music directors and everything were gay, but then they were also going to be the Sunday morning sermon out of Deuteronomy. It is hypocritical and unbelievable, even to this day.
Yeah. I would just add one difference is that yes, there is still this notion that sexual orientation or gender identity can be cured, but one big difference is that every medical and scientifically grounded kind of intervention. So I would say one of the really eye-opening messages of the film is the evolution of the APA itself. It's find homosexuality as a sociopathic personality disturbance, which is pretty extreme. And today, as we show in the film, their CEO and chief medical officer is harmful, and they are not alone. That is the mainstream view now. So the attempts to cure people and to change gender identity and sexual orientation are indeed continuing, but the institutional response is huge.
Are you at the beginning of getting it out there? What do you want to happen?
this fall. So we won World War II in less time than.
Well,
You can imagine how excited we are to start sharing this with the world. So we will be in a bunch of virtual film festivals like this later in the year. We dream of a time where we can again do in-person screenings. Aside from festivals, we'll be looking for virtual theatrical. A lot of theaters around the country are doing the same kind
I'm pushing for y'all to go to the Canes Festival and Sundance. You know, get it there.
Could happen.
Take Reverend.
Importantly, we have just one of our, our main production partner is the independent television service ITVS, which is funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And without their support for this project, we would have never been able to make this film, as well as a lot of generous donors who stepped forward. To donations from people. So it was a real team. This film. So we're excited to share it with the world, and we have an international distributor who's going to sell it all around the world. So we're hoping it'll be broadcast in a lot of countries around the world, and of course eventually streamed as well, and to make it easier for people to see. So we're confident millions of people will see this story, and we're really thrilled to share it with audiences.
Well, thank you for sharing with us. I'm sorry we're out of time.
I just one little quick thing. One of the things I wanted to quickly say was Barbara Giddings was part of Daughters of Bilitis. Daughters of Bilitis was founded by Lorraine Hansberry, who did the play Raisin in the Sun. Quick thing.
No, that's great. We appreciate those 6 degrees of separation. So thank you to the Reverend Dr. Silverstein. To September 3rd. Check it out. Thank you all for being here, and stay tuned for the trailer. And again, thank you.
Thank you.
I love the Pride Center because they support the whole person, emotionally, spiritually, and socially.
I love the Pride Center because we provide the most and the best services for seniors.
I love the Pride Center because it prioritizes women's health.
Because they showcase opportunity for creativity and the arts.
They host more than 65 groups each month. Everyone gathers there.
And they see the T in LGBT.
We provide a welcoming, safe space.
An inclusive home that celebrates, nurtures, and empowers
the LGBTQ communities.
And our friends and neighbors.
In South Florida.
We love the Pride Center because they provide forums for community dialogue.
Because they link people who know their status to healthcare.
The programs are forward-thinking and daring.
I love the Pride Center because they put our family first.
I love the Pride Center because they empower people with HIV.
We connect women to amplify their voices.
They help build a community for South Florida youth.
Juntos somos una familia.
I love the Pride Center because they use my donations responsibly and strategically.
As volunteers, we're able to help others in need.
Because a great community begins with a great community center.
Because together.
Porque juntos.
Together.
Because together, we can make a difference.
If you were gay in those days, you were diagnosed as suffering from a mental disorder. Like so many people in my generation, I went to psychoanalysis to be cured.
These are some of the methods doctors employ to cure homosexuality: electroshock therapy, hysterectomies on lesbians, castrations of gay men.
People use psychiatry as a reason to discriminate. Apart from the discrimination against us, it gave us a horrible image of ourselves.
In the early 1970s, there was this growing rebellion against psychiatry, and we wanted to remove homosexuality from the diagnostic and statistical manual.
The body of knowledge which claims sickness for homosexuality has to be challenged.
We could not expect our civil rights as long as we were birthed.
There were so many of us that were at the same point. Enough is enough. We're not going to take it anymore. Period.
A number of psychiatrists talked about, why don't we organize, we can make an impact. John Fryer took a step as being the first psychiatrist to say, I'm a gay person, but no one recognized it. He represented all the people who were hiding and invisible.
The effect was electric.
At psychiatric annual meetings, there were demonstrations, if not in fact riots. Ron Gold, a gay activist, he got up there and he yelled out, "Stop it, you're making me sick."
I told them in my speech, you don't have the right to decide that perfectly happy people are sick.
This fight was the most important moment in gay liberation history.